Hello? There you are. I probably don't need this mic. I can project this crowd, but we thank you very much for coming. My very smart phone, which I have silenced, has told me it's time to get started. I am Rebecca Nix, a former student, now faculty in the Teacher Development Center. And as a two-time graduate of UT Dallas in geosciences and science education, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this special seminar for lifelong learners, Advancing a Platform for Transformation of the High Seas, by Gillan Maxwell, founder and president of the Terramar Project. Dr. George Fair, Dean of the School of Interdisciplinary Studies and Vice President for Diversity and Community Engagement, will introduce our speaker, and then after Gillan's presentation, Christine Molina Maxwell, the Program Manager for Learning Technologies, will facilitate a question and answer session. Be advised that we are live streaming this event and will make the recording available online for posterity, so ask good questions. It's really great to see the diversity of our local community represented here tonight. Special thanks go to Drs. Fair, Novak, and Dean of the Schools of Interdisciplinary Studies, Natural Sciences and Mathematics, and Economic, Political, and Policy Sciences for making this possible. Dean Fair.
Well, indeed, it's a pleasure to have you here this evening. Gillan has been here since lunchtime, and we've had a couple of seminars with her, and they've been very exciting and enjoyable. We've had one on research, we've had one on education, and we brought in faculty and students from across the university, and they've been able to question her, and she's been able to respond in a very authoritative way and a very helpful way for all of us. Gillan Maxwell is the president and founder of the Terramar Project, a web-based nonprofit organized to protect the ocean commons by empowering a global community of ocean citizens. In addition to promoting awareness and responsibility for high seas, Terramar collaborates with stakeholders to make the oceans part of the 2015 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. The Terramar Project publishes an online daily newspaper called The Daily Catch, which aggregates the best marine and water news from around the world. Ms. Maxwell is also president of the global consulting firm LMAX, where she has led a number of private equity deals. She holds a bachelor's, master's, and master's degree from Oxford University. She is a licensed helicopter pilot, certified EMT, and a deep water submersible pilot. So it is my pleasure to bring you Ms. Maxwell.
Thank you.
First of all, I'd just like to say what an honor it is to be here in Dallas. I've spent a lot of time in Dallas because I go to helicopter school here. It's a special course on how to crash your helicopter and live, and I'm testimony to such a good course because I'm still here. So I started the Terramar Project about 2.5 years ago because I love the ocean. I started loving the ocean because I have two things I like a lot. I like chocolate and I like TV. And aged 8, these two things collided and I could have a cup of hot chocolate and watch TV and watch Jacques Cousteau on television. I started diving when I was 9 and then went on as I was explained, to become a deep worker, submersible pilot, ROV, AUV, operator, and deep sea diver, and I love the ocean. But it all changed for me in a flash, because I was on one of my first submarine dives, and on one of my first submarine dives, I was terribly excited. I thought I was going to change the world, find a new species, and I was dived down and I arrived at the bottom of the ocean. I switched the lights on, and what I saw, in fact, was a plastic hanger. And in that moment, I had an epiphany. First of all, I was devastated, incredibly sad. I cried, and I decided to dedicate the rest of my life to working on, around, and in ocean-related work, foundation, whatever. And I went on an odyssey to find a place where I could call home in the ocean. And I went on a number of expeditions through my ocean world. I ended up looking for Amelia Earhart twice, and this is actually a picture of Howland Island, where Amelia was heading. And you can see, it's difficult to see where the island is. I took this at roughly the same altitude, roughly the same time as she was heading there. And that shadow is not a shadow, it's the actual island. So you can tell it's hard to see. I went on expeditions looking at the best places in the world, pristine reefs. This shot was taken by my friend Enrique Sala, and it's in the Millennium Atoll. And this is what a healthy ocean should look like, full of sharks. Healthy corals is another sign of a beautiful ocean and a healthy ocean. Again, this was in the Millennium Atoll. But despite that, we know very, very little about the ocean. In fact, it's one of the least explored parts of our world. We spend 250 times more money exploring space. NASA's space budget is 250 times greater than NOAA's ocean budget. The funny object on the left here is James Cameron going down to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, which is at about 36,000 feet. And the dude on the right, he's walking on the moon. So only 3 people have been to the bottom of the ocean. And whilst about 12 people in fact have walked on the moon, just to give you some sense. And then in the 50 years since we've been exploring space, we've brought back about 850 pounds of moon rocks to somewhere between 80 and 100 million tons of fish from the ocean, just by way of comparison. And yet, we go to space because we look for new life forms, and maybe a new home. But every time we go down to the depths of the ocean reveals new and amazing discoveries. This is a hydrothermal vent, and it was thought impossible for life to exist down at those depths where there was no oxygen, no sunlight, but it is in fact teeming with life. And every single time we go down, we find a new species. This little critter here is a snailfish. It was found a couple of years ago in the Pacific at about 2,000 meters, thereabouts. So every time we dive, we find new life here on this planet, Earth. Why should we love the ocean? What does the ocean do for us? Why am I so obsessed with it? Well, I'd like you all to take a deep breath with me. We need to thank the ocean for that breath. It creates over 50% of the oxygen that we breathe. So we can all agree that of all the things that is important to us, breathing, clearly, is one of them. But there's lots of other things that the ocean does for us. It employs about 300 million people. It feeds 1 billion people a day, every single day. It is the largest highway in the world. A full 90% of all trade moves by ship. It creates our weather. It creates 98% of our rainfall. And we spend about $150 billion a year having fun in the sun. So I think we can all agree that the ocean is incredibly important. So let's talk a little bit more about the ocean. 71% of the planet is ocean, and 64% of the ocean lies outside of any single country's jurisdiction. That means a full 45% of the planet, this entire dark blue stuff, lies outside of any direct control from another country. And the good news, or the amazing news, the staggering news, is that you own that 45%. It is yours. The assets are yours. The ocean is yours. The oil, the gas, and the fish are yours. It is your global commons. So in the part of the world, in the world that we live in, there's so many things that divide us: creed, color, caste, religion, age, community. There's a whole part of the world that we own where none of these things matter, because the only thing that matters is to be human, and it is our global commons. What's exciting to me about the global commons is that it represents a fantastic opportunity for us individually to take control and have a voice and a say for a part of the world that is very, very important for everybody, and for you in particular, because it's yours. It basically is a map of what and how the high seas comes about. The history of the high seas goes back to ancient Roman times. Originally, of course, we owned the whole ocean, it was ours. And then things began to change, so it goes back to 533 AD. And then we had strange laws. A country could own 3 miles off their coastline because that's how far a cannonball could fire. And then, of course, it became 20 miles, 100 miles, 200 miles, until we arrive in 1982 at the Law of the Sea Convention, signed and ratified by 166 countries at the United Nations. Now, what it declared was the area that we're talking about, the high seas, the 64% of the ocean that is yours, is the natural heritage of mankind, and the assets are ours. There are some very, very interesting exceptions to the signatories in this list. You don't often see this list ever. So let's just see. We have Libya has not signed, Venezuela, Syria, North Korea, and America. Despite the fact that the US has not signed the Law of the Sea Convention, it de facto recognizes it. So even every president since Reagan, as a matter of fact, has wanted to sign the Law of the Sea Convention. On top of all the reasons why we should care about the ocean and why we should become actively involved, there's about over $15 trillion worth of reasons. I made this calculation based on what it is worth to all of us collectively over our lifetime, and arrived with this crazy number. This, if nothing else, the crazy number should get your attention. This map here is the governing structure of the high seas. It looks like some ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic. I'm familiar with all of these entities, and I don't understand any of it at all. By contrast, this is a US government structure. Now, we can all agree that this government doesn't work very well either, but at least the government structure is clear.
Once again, we want to take a look at the Arctic.
Go back, sorry. So part of the problem here is that we don't have enough data. We don't have information on the high seas. We don't have enough information on the ocean. We only have had 3 people go to the bottom of the ocean. We find new species all the time. And one of the most amazing things to me was up until about 2 weeks ago, in fact, we had no weather for the high seas. Now, I obsessively check the weather. This January, I was in the Pacific having fun in the sun, and I checked the weather in New York all the time because my friends were suffering through snowstorms, and I was gloating, to be honest. And I was sitting with the CEO of the Weather Channel recently, and I was like, he was telling me what a wonderful job, and I was like, but you don't report for 45% of the planet. He goes, what do you mean? I'm like, well, where's my high seas weather report? So I'm about to show you what happened as a consequence of that call. Now, this is not live streamed, and I confess that I spoke in Iceland at the Arctic conference 2 weeks ago, and this was done specifically for Iceland, but I thought I'd share it with you here tonight because it makes me laugh, it makes me happy, and I love the weather, and the guy was quite funny. So I'm just going to show you the clip so that you can understand what the weather looks like from a small part of the area of the high seas, and we'll come back and visit that.
Once again, we want to take a look at the Arctic high seas forecast, and something that we have seen a lot of in recent years are very strong, unusually warm areas of high pressure at very high latitudes. And this is something that has been expected by the climate modeling due to what is known as Arctic amplification. It's warming a lot more quickly at the highest of latitudes, and so temperatures are in fact much warmer than average a lot of the time. And in fact, our first spot here takes us north of Alaska and northwestern Canada in the Arctic high seas, and let's take a look at where this is. This is well off to the north, about 230 miles northwest of Meehan Island, and here's a look at the forecast for that location. And these temperatures, although cold, are actually a good 15 to 20, and in some cases 25 degrees above the average. It will be quite chilly, but getting even colder going into this upcoming weekend. Then we want to take you to the geographic North Pole, where you'd expect that it would be very cold. In this case, the temperatures are actually pretty close to average and even a little below average, and generally will be in the double digits below zero, and that'll be the case right through the weekend. Not a lot of variation in that case. Back to you.
So that is the weather. We can all agree we're not rushing to the high seas, that part of the world, anytime soon. It's cold, it's quite miserable. But what is interesting is, how can we make good decisions if we don't have a lot of information? Knowledge is power. Data is key. So we need more information. How can we know what's happening to the clouds over the ocean if we don't know, if we don't have it reported? What happens if you have a lot of particulates to the clouds? They're trying to measure these things now so they can understand cloud formation, rain, and so on. But we don't have the data. There's only the data for the high seas it exists up in the high Arctic. And I'm working to see how we can get more data in conjunction with the Coast Guard and others who work out there so that we can get that weather data. Then we have other problems in the high seas. What's interesting is that pretty much no fishing vessel in the high seas is tracked. I know where you all are all the time. I know because I can track your phone, and I can track you through your credit cards and so on. But out in the high seas, only 15% of the fishing vessels are tracked. I'd like to put this into context for you. Would anybody here fly if only 15% of the planes were talking to air traffic control? Anyone? Would you drive if only 15% of the cars had license plates? I would be the speed demon going straight through that red light. I'm just going to confess right now. So the problem is that the fishing vessels are not tracked, and they're not tracked, which allows them to fish at will, burst through quotas, take endangered species, illegally dump, all sorts of other terrible things. We fish irresponsibly. This is an image of the largest fishing net. It's a Spanish trawler. It fits 12 Boeing 747s in its mouth. You can imagine if you are a fish, you're a shoal fish, you're going to get eaten in that net. This is an image of the actual tuna that sold a while back for a staggering $1.7 million. That's interesting for a number of reasons. One, because for one fish to be worth $1.7 million probably indicates that it's because it's rare. Nothing that's in abundance costs that much money. And then I'd like you to think, if this tuna had been caught in the high seas, which is your high seas, and if this tuna in the high seas was your tuna, that's $1.7 million that I took out of your pocket. Or conversely, if that tuna is your tuna in the high seas and he stays in the high seas, that tuna is money in your pocket. It's $1.7 million. So I just made you all multimillionaires. Check. We also are irresponsible on other levels. This is an unattractive picture of a shark fin being taken out. So we kill about 100 million sharks a year, not for any other purpose, but for their fins. First of all, the practice of finning a shark is really, really disturbing. It is one of the most shocking things I personally have ever seen. They pull the shark up, they cut the fin, and they throw the shark back into the water to drown because he cannot swim with a shark or else to get eaten by other sharks. It's not just a barbaric practice. It's quite crazy because a shark is the alpha species of the ocean. And just like any species, every species has its worth and its place in the world. And we need alpha species. We need the sharks of the ocean because a shark is at the top of the predator list and it controls all the other, the balance of the ocean. So when we remove 100 million a year, it changes the entire ecosystem of the ocean and not for the good. This is shrimp. These are shrimp boats. And each of those little dots is a shrimp boat. Now, if you are a shrimp, you're not escaping. Let's just be clear. But shrimping is actually one of the most inefficient types. I think we fish about 15 kilos. I can't remember what it is. It's 15 kilos of shrimp and 3 kilos, what is it?
It's a 15-to-1 ratio.
15-to-1 ratio, sorry, there we go, thank you, Rob.
One shrimp for every...
One shrimp, and all the rest of those things are bycatch. And bycatch is the things that you're not wanting to eat. So they pull up the shrimp, they take the shrimp, and the rest of the fish or species, whatever else they pull up, generally gets thrown back into the water to die, or just as waste. So in this day and age, when we can land on the moon or walk on the moon, how can we not produce nets that only catch what we want? Or why do we waste when the last thing we need on the planet is waste? We have more people to feed, not less. We need more food, not less. And by the way, a lot of the fish meal that goes, it goes to feed chickens. So we put fish meal to feed chickens so that the chicken can taste more like fish. I don't know. Then we have big trawler boats, and the nets go down up to 2,000 meters, and it trawls along the bottom of the ocean. Highly destructive. I have dived in a spot right after a trawler had gone through. It was devastating to see. Just would like to put into context, only 1% of the ocean floor is covered by corals. Yet a full 25% of marine life depends on corals. So every time we have a trawler that goes out and scrapes off the bottom and kills millions and millions of miles of corals, we're doing irreversible damage. On top of the damage that we're doing, we don't even know what we're losing. We don't even know what we're killing. We don't know what it means to kill that. We don't know what it means. We don't know what we're losing at all. And corals are beautiful as well. At the rate that we are going, your children won't be able to go to a restaurant and ask for sushi. They will have California rolls. The pressure on the fish stocks today is immense. A full 30% of the fish that you eat are fraudulent. Just would like to explain that. So if you order a white tuna, you're just as likely to get a fish called escarole, which is fondly known as the X-lax fish. So I do not recommend that you order that on a date because you will spend it in the potty that night. Recently in Chicago, there was a couple that went out for dinner that were found to have been eating pufferfish and ended up in hospital. There are obviously benign forms of fish fraud where you eat a species, you're told it's wild and it's actually farm caught. But obviously, there is danger in the fish market. A fish fully trades hands. It's one of the most opaque industries. Normally changes hands about 15 times. So you don't know when it was caught. I love the one when you're eating at a restaurant here, say in Dallas, and they go, fresh caught from Fiji. And you're like, really? No, that thing was caught months ago. It's lived in the hold of a... You just don't know, and you don't know. So fish fraud's a huge issue. Fish tracking is a huge issue. So what we're putting in the ocean is what we're taking out of the ocean is dwarfed by what we're putting in the ocean. Every single piece of plastic ever made is still in existence. Think about that for a second. So that plastic bag that your Chinese got delivered in the other night, that plastic bag, even though you threw it away, it's around somewhere. And the bottle of water that you had 10 years ago, that bottle is still around somewhere. There are 46,000 pieces of plastic per square mile in the ocean. The largest garbage patch exists between Hawaii and San Francisco. Fish eat. They mistake that when the plastic breaks down, it becomes small, and the fish think it's food, so they eat it. And if they don't die from eating the plastic, and they get caught in one of those big nets and end up in your plate, you are eating plastic. Icky. No, we don't like that. There is so much plastic in the ocean. There are 5 giant areas. They congregate like this because of the currents, that UNESCO has recognized the state of garbage. Who knew that the state of garbage existed? This is a not terribly good picture of me, but I am standing in Costa Rica, and this bridge was built entirely of fishing net tackle that has been discarded. And what makes that even sadder is that where I was a marine reserve, so there shouldn't really be fishing nets there at all. What else are we putting in the ocean? Fukushima, 32 trillion becquerels of radioactive waste, found finally on the coast of California last week. BP Horizon, big problem, affected 68,000 square miles. Big deal. What happened at the end with all the oil? Everyone's like, it got dealt with. No, it didn't get dealt with. What happened was the oil spread, and the company put dispersants on the oil to drop the oil to the bottom of the ocean so that you couldn't see it, to make you feel better. But then the oil at the bottom of the ocean gets eaten by fish. And some of the results of that are only just beginning to be documented and found. Mahi-mahi, for instance, have been found to swim slower. You might say, big deal that a fish swims slower than it's supposed to, but it's a big deal to the fish because he has to swim fast to catch his dinner, and if he can't catch his dinner, he's going to starve. And he can't catch his dinner if he can't swim fast, so it's a vicious circle. There's other really interesting things we put in the water. Everything you put in the ground comes out, goes to a trash area, seeps into the water table, goes to a river, comes into the ocean. Canada recently, they discovered the contraceptive pill was killing a little species of fish called the fat-headed minnow. But not to be too depressing, not every rubbish, not every waste is man-made. The Antarctic penguin, 3% of the glaciers are made up of penguin pee. So, just FYI. But that, this is a picture from Lamont Doherty, and that dot on that person's finger is a drop of ocean water. That drop of ocean water contains 12,000 microbes and viruses, and each one of those microbes and viruses has a job to do. It feeds people, it oxygenates the ocean. So if one tiny drop like that does all that work, imagine if you change the chemistry of that one drop. What happens if you change the chemistry of trillions and trillions of dots? You get this. That is a dead spot. It's a part of the ocean. There are different degrees of dead spots, hypoxic areas where nothing lives. I've swum here, and it is dead. There was nothing there. Then we have carbon. So I don't pick what side of the climate debate we're on. I just deal with the facts. The ocean is heating, and the ocean is becoming more acidic. The value they put on carbon sequestration is 148 billion. The heating of the ocean is having an effect because cold water species of fish are swimming north to cooler waters. And shellfish production over the last 10 years in America has dropped by 40% because the little critters that make shells are having a hard time making their shells because of the carbon. Then that's not all. We've got new technologies to come. The Seabed Authority, the authority that governs the seabed in your commons, has sold 17 rights for prospecting. I think we can all agree that mining is a dirty business on land. Just imagine for a second what it would be like in the sea. And there are no rules that govern this, no standards that have been set. So once you know what happened in Deepwell Horizon, this is deeper, this potentially has catastrophic effects. And by the way, did anybody here receive a check for our prospecting rates? They have yet to decide what happens even in the ocean if it does happen, or two, what happens to the money. So this all has very important problems. So this is a Bloomberg bipartisan report that just came out. $35 billion in storm damage. Storms, when the ocean heats, become stronger. We've had a 14% decline in crop yields. We're spending $12 billion more on cooling bills because it's getting so hot, and AC went up. And then they're projecting flooding, and they've put like a $100 billion mark on that. So what can you do? What can we do? Because it's our problem. And if I was a kid today, I would be livid that we were not tackling this head on. So I think we all have a responsibility. I don't want to be able to say that the tragedy of the commons is just de facto what happens. I think we can turn the tragedy into the commons, or what's commonly known as that, into the first success of the commons, but I cannot do it, impossible, without your help. It is yours. You should participate. If you can come to the Terramar Project's website and get your ocean passport, becoming a joint citizen of land and sea, and have your voice heard. What does that even mean? Why does that make a difference? It makes a difference because I have now spoken 9 times at the United Nations, and I advocate for a ocean sustainable development goal, a standalone. So in 2000, the UN passed a set of goals called the Millennium Development Goals that have been largely very successful, and they get replaced by the Sustainable Development Goals that are going to be voted on definitively next September. The ocean was not mentioned at all in the Millennium Development Goals. Mad, if you think that 3/4 of our planet is ocean, and it is so central to our lives. Cannot allow the ocean not to be part of the next roadmap for 15 years of sustainable use of our planet. That would be planetary suicide. So how do you get that message to the UN? You get your passport, because that's what we stand for, sustainable use of our ocean. There's a picture of the passport. The website Terramar does different things. Doesn't just have the passport for the citizens. We have a daily newspaper called the Daily Catch. So part of the problem is, of course, that the ocean is never front page news unless it's a sort of beach body celebrity contest. But happily at the Daily Catch, it's always front page news. And we're a full social media digital site to appeal to the younger audience who really only operate on a digital platform and comprehend a digital platform. And also, we don't have the infrastructure that many foundations have to support this. You can literally be virtual anywhere. We're on Twitter, Facebook. We've built the history of the ocean on Facebook, so you can come and see what did the first submarine look like in the 16th century, the first diving bell, and so on. It's all there. It's fun. You can go and see it. And we work for people who don't live near the ocean or don't go to the ocean. This is Google Maps for the ocean. I think it's on 19 different areas. You can go and have a full 360 view of the ocean, and it's absolutely gorgeous, and kids love it. You can connect to the ocean in a way that's fun and engaging, getting a parcel of the ocean, which you can name and share or give as a gift to someone It's just a fun thing for the person who has everything. What, you give them a little digital passport and a piece of the ocean. You can become an ambassador. And instead of being a geographic ambassador to your global commons, you can pick a species and advocate for your species. And we do this with the Smithsonian EOL, Encyclopedia of Life. The Ocean Sustainable Development Goal at the UN. Obviously, I think America should sign the Law of the Sea Convention. How can America have moral authority if it's not part of the largest signatory for the Law of the Sea? How can America tell China that it can't fight over its its interests in the Pacific when it's not part of the Law of the Sea? Every president since Reagan has wanted to sign this, and it's been blocked. I think we need to get that unblocked, and we need to sign it so that we can lead the way. We need more marine protected areas, just as there are on land, areas of sensitivity, ecological sensitivity, or great beauty. Only about 2% of the ocean is protected, whilst about 12% of land is protected. So areas where fish breed, or areas of great natural beauty for us, should be preserved for generations to come. Also because a healthy ocean full of wild animals is a more sustainable ocean. I'm swimming under these sharks, and I get asked all the time if I'm scared of swimming with sharks. I'm not, actually. I'm scared when I don't see sharks. Not seeing sharks is a sign that the ocean is not healthy. We should say no to single plastic use because it's just not smart. We use and discard 1 trillion plastic bags a year. Does that make sense? It's crazy. We need more science and more, you can see my head there in the submarine. There are 18,000 products that come from the ocean and counting. Anybody here wearing perfume? There's probably whale poop in that. Fish oil. We get lots of products. I was on a dive in a submarine, not a lead, I was just a passenger. We found a new species of deep coral, and it has been analyzed and found to have phenomenal cancer-fighting properties. So medicines, new discoveries, new life, there's so much yet to be uncovered and to be found. We obviously need to track fishing vessels. I think it's unconscionable that vessels can just go and fish at will. This is what I think we do when it comes to the issues on the ocean. Because we can't see it, we bury our heads in the sand. Perhaps because most of what happens in the ocean happens out of sight. But I don't think out of sight should be, in fact, out of mind. We absolutely cannot let the ocean be managed like this. We need to come together as a community because at the end of the day, we are one species, we have one home, and we have one common destiny. The place where that is represented, the place on the planet where we actually have that right, that global commons, is in our high seas. I don't think we have a choice, and I'm asking you, I'm pleading with you to help take this and make it into a movement where the ocean becomes central and we deal with the issues and come together as one voice over it. Thank you.
That was I've been here listening to you talk for several times a day here, and I really am very inspired. I'm very inspired by it. So thank you. Thank you. I would like to open the door to anyone who has some questions for Gillan. And we're not very many people here, so there is a microphone there. But I think if you go ahead. I'm saying okay.
Yes, my question will be, is ocean farming, is it something that we should pursue? Will it problem that we are seeing, such as overfishing?
The most sustainable resource on the planet is fish. If we just fish sustainably, we wouldn't have to do farm fish. Farm fishing has all sorts of other issues. They're generally, not all farm fishing is made equal. There are some good farm fish, but there are also some quite unattractive farm fish. They use antibiotics in the fish. They live in small confined areas, and the water's very dirty, and not all farm fish are that safe, I think. So, caution with farm fish. I think wild fish is superior.
I'll connect with that question. So, within agriculture, within farmers, we get a lot of education these days when it comes to how they raise their animals and how they share, how they sell it, and with the whole process, and the organic and all this. Do you feel that soon in the future that fishermen will have that same form of education? Because I feel like to fish sustainably, they need to be kind of educated. Do you see any acts starting to happen with education in that realm?
So I think that inevitably some sort of homogenization of the process. First of all, that a fish changes up to 15 hands. That doesn't work for me. We don't know where the fish comes from, so some sort of fish tracking is probably wise. You need to know how it's caught, where it's caught, when it's caught. So we need a lot more information. So I think, in fact, at Secretary Kerry's conference, he advocated for that. He says, so that is in the pipeline, and I think new regulations around fish is coming, and it should. Anyone else?
You mentioned that the United States is one of the few countries that has signed that treaty. Do you feel like the opposition to that is bipartisan?
No. I think it's not a very bipartisan. I think it's mostly a Republican situation. And also America traditionally just doesn't like signing treaties. Didn't sign the Kyoto Protocol and so on, but it should sign this one. It already really abides and uses the laws of the sea and accepts them. And literally every president, the Coast Guard supports it, there's no reason really not to. There's no negative to it.
Yes.
On that idea, do you think there's a problem with education of the voters or whoever it is? Do you think they have an issue with education and really not knowing what this is really about?
Well, I think in general, the ocean's not taught at school, and we don't really have the ocean as part of a curriculum. And if you don't live by it, or you don't have a job next to the ocean, its centrality to our life and the issues just aren't at the forefront. Plus, fish somehow not as warm and fuzzy as a polar bear, and no one thinks of a fish having feelings, and I don't see kids walking around with little fish animals on their beds. So part of that is that reason. The other thing is, of course, we don't see really what happens, just wet and blue, and we just go there for a bit of sun tanning. So part of this is education, I think, is critical. For the systems, the planetary systems, the ocean's the blue heart of the planet. And I think if people realized exactly how central it was, how important it was, and that fish have feelings just like polar bears, then maybe we'd have a bit more. I realized this when I was fishing once, and I've always felt guilty. I speared a fish, and it turned and looked at me in the moment, and I connected in that second with the fish. Who knew? Anyone else?
Go ahead.
Do you think the sea shepherds are effective in protecting the oceans?
I think that the Sea Shepherd have done wonders to bring attention to actions on the ocean. I sort of draw the line at breaking the law anywhere where that is. So I think it's challenging. And I think that's one ship against one ship or one whaling. I think that education needs to be spread, so you can't leave it to one organisation. I think that's why education is so key critical. When you bring the young minds and young hearts to this problem, and they come home and say, Mum and Dad, I don't want to have a plastic bag, or we should protect this endangered species, or support this marine park, that's a movement that's sustainable. One group can't do it alone. This is something we all need to get in on together. And I think breaking laws is not the way to do it necessarily. Anyone else?
Out of curiosity, how does one part of the ocean become protected?
By presidential decree, as we saw. President Bush actually, just as he was leaving, created one of the largest marine parks. Obama is talking about the same. Chagos, there's petitions to governments, and in their economic zones they control, they can designate an area as a park. But there is a movement afoot to actually make the high seas an entire park. The Global Ocean Commission, headed by numerous ex-heads of state and commissioners, have suggested that making the high seas a park for no fishing. They've done math on that says that fisheries would increase by about 150%, and it would offer ultimately more jobs and more food on the table. So the question is, if we have millions of people who sign up and get the high seas passports and then ask for the high seas to become a fishing-free zone, maybe it would change, because fish don't vote, but you do. Anyone else?
So one thing I really believe is that for change to happen within our oceans, it first needs to start with on our land, and having over 250,000 rivers in the U.S. Education really needs to grow more, not just along the coast, but within the central part of our country. And I feel like in the last 5-10 years, the interest has really peaked with protecting our waterways. And as I had the summit recently in D.C. with Harry and
Right.
But do you foresee more things happening, pulling the whole country together instead of just?
Well, I think water is a central issue. So if you're from California, you're suffering today from a terrible drought. If you're from Miami, you're dealing with climate change and rising sea level every day. And if you're from New York, where I am from, then we went through Hurricane Sandy. And the wars and tensions all around the world are water-based. Many of them are water-based. So I think that it's inevitable that water is going to become one of the central, if not the central question. And our waterways, what we drink, where we get our water, where it rains, how it rains, these are all absolutely key questions. So I talk oceans just because I love the ocean. But at the end of the day, all these things are connected. What you do in the, just like we saw in Canada, in what you put in the water ends up in the ocean. So yes, you start with the waterways and you end up at the sea. So I couldn't agree with you more. And inevitably, when we're threatened, do we have water? Where do we get these? We will all come together, because that will become the central issue that we deal with. And water is the next big question. I think if the last decade was pink for breast cancer, I believe the next decade will be blue for oceans and water. Anyone else?
Does the Terramar project, do you guys lobby?
No lobbying. I don't lobby. I mean, I'm at the UN. That's the only place where we operate. And the reason the UN, again, is because I believe if the ocean had a standalone sustainable goal, it would be a game changer for the ocean in general, because it would foster new international cooperation, partnerships between the public and private sector, potentially billions of dollars, and force onto the table some of these key questions about how do you manage the ocean? What is the best way to be sustainable? How do we protect this giant resource for future generations? And I don't know any other single piece of active legislation or law that could have such a giant effect over such a huge piece of the ocean and move the needle. Because there's lots of people doing good work in Japan and save this coral, look after this species. But as we all know, everything is connected. So dealing with one small item, it's fabulous. There are lots of great people, but I think you want to deal with the whole. Take a macro view, and then you will make changes across the board, big ones, for the better.
You had a question?
I was just wondering, is this a problem that we can legislate our way out of? Is it something that we can rely on for?
I really do. I think if we mandated sustainability, we would change the way that we fish, and we would track the fish, and we would get more information so that we could protect the areas where fish breed. We should not be fishing where fish are making fish babies. I think we can all agree. We should not be fishing if it's the last 3 tuna left on the planet, because we need them. Tuna don't do well in captivity. So we need more information so we can make smarter choices. But at the end of the day, we need to tell our you're the consumer. When you go to your sushi restaurant, tell them you don't want bluefin tuna. You should not be eating bluefin tuna. It's just, you should not be. And there are other species that you should not be eating, and you shouldn't be eating it not just because it's endangered, but also it's full of mercury. So you need to become consumer aware about what you eat, where you eat it, and ask intelligent questions, make the choices. But I'm really keen on the UN because I really believe that if they took this issue on, I'm not that I'm necessarily the biggest fan of the UN, and I'm sure there are lots of people here who aren't, but in this singular issue, I think it can make a big difference.
Can I just say you might want to say about for example, the World Bank could fund if it...
there are options if that's passed that you get more World Bank funding, or it really is endless possibilities. It raises the level of it raises the importance of the ocean internationally. I think it would be a really big deal.
Anyone else? Okay, well listen, we want to thank you very much for coming, and we hope that there'll be many more passport holders of Terramar.
Yes, spread the word.
Spread the word.